This is the film you will not see on the BBC or CNN or any other Western media. Over the last year we have witnessed what is the greatest crime of the 21st century. And perversely, it's a crime that has been meticulously documented and presented to us by the people who are carrying it out. We at Al Jazeera have collated all that evidence, packaged it. What it reveals is truly shocking.
Mam do was pytanie. Co słyszycie w TV o zbrodniach przeciwko ludzkości i o bardzo dobrze udokumentowanym ludobójstwie dokonywanym na Palestyńczykach przez izraelską armię? Czy słyszycie może o zabijaniu przez snajperów dzieci pod bramą szpitala? A może wspominają o wykorzystywaniu psów do dokonywania gwałtów na torturowanych palestyńskich więźniach? Czy mówi się o setkach zamordowanych dziennikarzy? Czy dyskutuje się na temat wykorzystywania cywilów jako żywych tarcz? Czy pokazują może nagrania, na których widać, jak izraelscy snajperzy strzelają do Bogu ducha winnych i nieuzbrojonych cywilów? A co na to? Posłuchajcie i pooglądajcie krótki film na temat najbardziej humanitarnej armii świata.
We focus on the town of Khaza, which is a small town of about 13,000 people. The Israeli army enters this town just after Christmas. It's emptied of people, and they simply destroy it. And they record themselves doing it. They post before and after videos, and the town is entirely flattened.
There is no precedent for this in the whole history of the Israeli army. We have become addicted to explosions.
The willful destruction of civilian property for punitive reasons, or even perhaps to create a buffer strip, is illegal. You can't do that. It's against international law. And they're doing it, and they're recording it, and they're putting it on Facebook. And we know the names of the soldiers and the commanders who did it. They go into the homes of Palestinians, and they're often clearly staying there, and they just smash them up. And they film themselves smashing them up. They also delight in going through women's underwear drawers, and this is a sort of recurring obsession. You have to see Israeli soldier videos in the context of the broader output of Israeli society.
If you gave me a button to just erase Gaza, every single living being in Gaza would no longer be living tomorrow, I would press it in a second. I would press it right now. Give me that button. I'd press it right now.
There you go.
And I think most Israelis would.
There's an Israeli song called This Was My Home. And what they would do is dress up as caricatures of obviously what they perceive Palestinians to be, being sung mockingly to people who no longer have homes. We're not looking at some sort of obscure subculture within Israeli society. This is mainstream Israeli society. When people tell you who they are, believe them.
It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. And we will fight until we'll break their backbone.
972 magazine carried a story about how the Israelis were using AI, artificial intelligence, for targeting. Essentially, they had a problem. They wanted a rate of strikes in the Gaza Strip, which human computation couldn't keep up with. They needed to use AI to identify these targets. They're using people's phones and their social media, any information at all they can scrape about them, and then they track them through their phones. So who are they talking to on their phone? Who are they simply near as they're carrying their phones around? And they have a little league table. And if you accumulate enough points, you can be killed. The terrifying thing is, how do you kill them? Where do you kill them? And they reached the calculation that it's much easier to kill people when they're at home, which is where the second bit of software kicks in, which is called Where's Daddy? The naming is indicative of a fairly dark sense of humour. They track you. Once Daddy is home, they can kill you, and of course along with anyone else who is in the house as well. It's astonishing what Israeli soldiers do put on film, but that raises the question of what they don't put on film. You very rarely see them actually fighting. Every now and then you'll see them all firing their guns, but usually pretty clear there's no incoming. On the other hand, what you see a great deal of is them dressing up in women's underwear. Has Israel managed to destroy Hamas? I would point to a really simple, common sense thing. Israeli soldiers have posted thousands of videos online. The IDF, the Israeli army, repeatedly posts videos online. Scour those videos for the bodies of dead fighters, and there's remarkably few. I remember 20 years ago in Afghanistan when the Taliban fell, before the age of social media, and I remember making films about that. Footage with piles of corpses. It's extraordinary how few dead Hamas fighters we are seeing. Another extraordinary facet of this conflict is the repeated attacks on hospitals. They have assaulted every single one of the 36 hospitals in the Gaza Strip. We have the films of Mohammed al-Halou, a remarkable young journalist who really chronicled the whole story of the Nasser hospital. The Israelis are very keen to drive people taking refuge in the hospital out, to force them further south. They send a messenger into the hospital to order the people there to leave, and they use a detainee. And they've made it quite clear to him, they know who his mother is, where she is, and that she will be killed if he does not return. So he does return. They send him back because the people still aren't leaving. People aren't leaving because they don't trust the Israelis. One of the few people who does leave is his mother. She follows him out with a small group of other people, and he's killed in front of her eyes. Having used him as a messenger, as a human shield, effectively, they simply shoot him. They shoot him 3 times in front of her eyes and kill him. What is extraordinary about so many of the soldiers' videos is the sense of impunity they have. One particular video is the 202nd paratroopers. When they left Gaza, individuals within that unit put together a video. It's like a commemorative video, and it's edited and it's set to music and so on. It's been up on YouTube now for 6 months. It includes 3 men, separate incidents, men who are shot by snipers. They are putting up the killing of people who are clearly unarmed. And for soldiers to post this in their own names shows a sense that they simply don't have to account for their actions at all. Deaths by snipers are very common in the Gaza Strip, and it's not just adult men. There's a particular shot of a child, a young boy, who was shot at the gates of the Nasser hospital. It's then too dangerous to collect the body. If you're a sniper, you know who you're shooting. You've got very good sights and you know perfectly well what you're looking at. Mohammed al-Halou, he is almost killed numerous times. One of the occasions is he's shot. He's wearing a flak jacket. They've actually managed to hit the thing that says press. One of the dreadful things about working as a journalist and as a human rights worker during this conflict, not only do you not have sort of immunity, as it were, you are positively a target. As Western journalists, we sometimes work in very hairy situations and we face danger and so on. What we don't generally wrestle with is the perpetual fear that they're going to murder our children. And in fact, on a number of occasions, they have murdered the families of Al Jazeera journalists. It's shameful that the international journalistic community has not stood up more, not just for Al Jazeera, but for all those other journalists who have been killed in the Gaza Strip.
Well over 10% of all journalists in Gaza have lost their lives since this conflict began. The usual mortality rates expected of infantry soldiers is less than 5%. So we're talking about absolutely shocking levels of loss of life.
Detainees are clearly abused when they are first taken prisoner. We've all seen the images of them stripped to their underwear. It's clearly designed to humiliate. We gathered accounts in the Gaza Strip of people being beaten. We have a picture of one man who had a Star of David carved into his back. In a way, for many, this is just a prelude to when they're taken into Israel, to these detention centres. In our film, we have one grotesque eyewitness account of a dog being used to rape someone.
فجأة جردوه من ملابسه السفلية. إجا كابتن كان موجود. جاء زي وضع مادة حاجة يعني على مؤخرة الشاب وأطلقوا كان في كلب موجود أطلقوا عليه الكلب هذا يعني كيف أقول لك مش مارس الجنس اغتصب الشاب اغتصبوه في معنى الكلمة.
UN report at the end of June identified 53 individuals who have been killed in Israeli detention. There's a report on Israel's Channel 13 broadcasting to the world, advertising the fact, celebrating the fact that these men spend 24 hours in complete darkness with a single hole for a toilet, in handcuffs, chained together with leg cuffs. The whole focus of the report is clearly the Israeli public, and what they're trying to stress is how badly these people are being treated, because clearly the political issue within Israel is whether they're not being treated badly enough.
של אינוס, בעצור כפות, זה לא מעניין אותך? בגדול, עוד פעם, זה מעניין לי את העכוז מה עשו לאיש חמאס הזה. אני כל הזמן זוכר, קודם כל, הדבר היחיד שמבחינתי הוא בעיה פה, זה שזו לא איזושהי מדיניות מוסדרת של המדינה להתעלל בעצירים. כי בגדול, זה גם, קודם כל מגיע להם, וזה אחלה נקמה שאנחנו צריכים לתת להם. ודבר שני, אולי זה גם ישמש אותנו קצת יותר כהרתעה.
No one can hide here. No one can pretend they didn't know what was happening, because the Israelis were shouting it in our faces. Human shields are an enormously important topic, and it's an absolute indictment of Western media, the way this is covered. The idea that Hamas, the Qassam brigades and so on, used the civilian population as human shields. There is no evidence that they are positively using them as human shields in the sense that they're hiding behind them, not allowing them to leave or not telling them that they're there. A second point about that as well. What is there about Israeli behavior over the last year that would lead anyone for a moment to think that the presence of civilians would lead them to hold their fire? There's absolutely nothing to suggest that they would respect the fact that there are civilians in the way and therefore not shoot, which means that it would be utterly pointless for Hamas. I've looked at the Qassam Brigade's own combat videos, which are a stark contrast to the videos that the Israeli soldiers put online. There's over 300 of them, and they very often show successful attacks on tanks and other armoured vehicles. These attacks all take place in desolate, abandoned landscapes. I have not seen a single civilian. Now then there is the secondary point. The UN, international and Israeli human rights organisations have found the Israelis to be guilty of using human shields. In the film we have footage of this. You can see it. There they are, hiding behind people, resting their guns on their shoulder. They've got a man and he's being forced to go and inspect empty buildings, open the doors and so on, so that if they're booby-trapped or if there's an ambush, he will get it. It's clearly absolutely systematic. Now, the fact that the entirety of Western media and the Western political class continues to trot out this mantra about it being Hamas that hides behind human shields, when all of the abundant evidence suggests precisely the opposite.
The Israelis today saying that Hamas use Palestinians as human shields, do they?
Killing the victims, then blaming the victims for killing themselves. I mean, what is this logic? Palestinian groups take their own people hostages. This is racism. This is sickness.
The appalling calibre of the journalism is just absolutely shocking. Israeli behaviour is dependent on the indulgence of the West. We use some of Matt Kennard's reporting in Declassified UK. Matt has done an awful lot of work exposing the role of RAF at Kriteri, a place most British people probably haven't heard of, but we still own a chunk of Cyprus, and on it we have a bloody great Air Force base. And it is clearly playing a vital role in this conflict. Right from the beginning of the conflict, you had huge military transport planes flying to Israel, numerous surveillance flights in the air for 6 hours at a time, sent from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus over the Gaza Strip. And the suspicion would be that they are providing targeting information to the Israelis. Already by March, they'd accumulated 1,000 hours of surveillance footage over the Gaza Strip. The government is not providing a satisfactory explanation of what all this footage is being used for.
Will he also explain what role, legally or otherwise, Britain has played in overflying Gaza with surveillance aircraft and the use of RAF Akrotiri as a staging point for aircraft going to Israel, which many people believe are carrying weapons that are used to bomb Gaza?
I am very comfortable with the support that we give to Israel, and I won't comment on operational issues.
The double standards of Western media, of Western politicians, are just breathtaking. I mean, you just have to look at David Lammy and Keir Starmer's response to the Iranian attack on Israel, which didn't actually kill anyone.
I utterly condemn this attempt by the Iranian regime to harm innocent Israelis.
And they were straight to the lectern condemning it in a way that they have not condemned the Israelis, who have killed over 40,000 people. It's quite clear that the lives of one group of people are worth more than the lives of another group of people. If Israel is attacked, the Western media and Western politicians are full of rhetoric about Israel has a right to defend themselves.
Israel has a right to defend itself.
Israel has a right to defend itself.
Israel has a right to self-defense.
We stand with Israel and we recognise her right to self-defense.
If Israel attacks people, then the whole media narrative is about fears of escalation. In other words, the great danger that the other side might fight back. The double standards are just breathtaking. One way in which we're sort of liberated at Al Jazeera is we don't have to buy into this bogus two-sidesism, this bogus sort of equivalence. There is no equivalence between, on the one hand, an all-powerful occupying power building illegal settlements on Palestinian land, and on the other side, a prostrate, helpless powerless people. There's no moral, political or military equivalence there. But also, on October the 7th, 2 babies are killed, okay, which is dreadful, it's appalling. At the end of August, when the Gazan Health Ministry published detailed figures, the first 14 pages, 701 names, were taken up with children under the age of 1. And that doesn't include 7,000 people for whom there was no documentation. It doesn't include the large numbers of people who are still under the rubble or who have died because of lack of access to health care. It's very, very likely that in the end, the total number of dead and injured in the Gaza Strip will be more than 250,000 people. There is just no comparison between the two. Now, if, as for example the BBC often does, you achieve balance by having 2 stories in your evening news report. On the one hand, reporting the very real anguish and trauma of a family who still have a son or a daughter in captivity in Gaza, and on the other hand, an airstrike which has killed 40 people, 15 of them, whatever, who are perhaps children. If you are treating that as equivalent, you are buying into a fundamentally racist arithmetic.
There was no balance in what was going on. Israeli spokespeople who we did have on were given a lot of free rein to say whatever they wanted with very little pushback.
Babies were set on fire. Babies were shot in the head.
Whereas any Palestinian guest was asked to condemn Hamas.
But I want to ask you specifically about Hamas's actions today. Do you support them?
Israel has a right to defend itself. That was the editorial line that was drilled into us, into all of our coverage. To a guest talking about, Israeli airstrikes killing Palestinians in Gaza, that would be the response from our presenters.
Denying access to food is collective punishment, and that we should all be clear in saying that.
Israel will argue, obviously, that it has a right to defend itself.
People were terrified of using the word genocide in coverage. They still are. You will very rarely see it in any BBC coverage. And if an interviewee says the word genocide...
This is a genocide happening in front of our eyes.
That word is, as you know, incredibly emotive, and the Israelis, as you know, will be saying that they are targeting Hamas only.
No one can say they didn't know. The Israelis could not have made it clearer to us what they were doing in their rhetoric, social media they were posting, and what their own media was saying, that this was an exercise in ethnic cleansing, quite possibly an exercise in genocide. They were making it abundantly clear to us. And if we are ignorant, we are willfully ignorant. When people tell you who they are, believe them. And the Israelis have certainly told us who they are over the last year. The experience of the last year is testimony to the inadequacy of traditional media in the West, which seems simply to be unable to tell this story as it really is. And it highlights more than ever the need for independent media, outlets like Double Down News. And I would urge you to support Double Down News on Patreon.